I'd like to welcome our listeners to today's podcast. This is the first of about 16 podcasts that will be going sort of a deep dive into actually what the Assembli app is being designed to do. So this is the first of 16. Now it's a bit unusual because what we're doing with this first one is going into what we call the engine of the app. So for those of you who are sort of like most people in the world wanting to get right into the application and what does it do for me, be a little patient because ultimately this podcast is going to show why it can be so powerful for you in the future. So just bear with us and watch through with the next few episodes and you'll start to get the idea of how it all comes together. But we're really excited to have two guests with us today, and I'd like to just introduce them first before I go on to explain more about it. We have Madi Long with us. Madi is an operations professional, currently leading three startup organizations focused on analytics, marketing, e-commerce, project management, and so on. Madi, when I read that, I thought, wow, one startup is plenty for most people. How did you get roped into three?
You know me, Mark. I like a good challenge.
All right. Anything else that you want to tell our listeners about you, just to round out who you are here, rather than me putting it into my own words?
No, I mean, 2 years ago, Mark, that's kind of where we got connected. I got to spend a lot of time with you and your family, and really loved my time working with you guys at Assembli for the short months that I was there. So really looking forward to see where the product is today and how things are really taking shape. So just excited to be here.
Thanks. Well, we're looking forward to your comments and sort of setting us straight a little bit as well, of course. Nate Scholz, great to have you also with us. Nate has a storied past, I would say, in various parts of the world, and now works with the innovation, department or section of Frontier Ventures. So, Nate, we had coffee recently on the beautiful shores of near Bellingham, Washington State, and enjoyed a good introduction and chat there. Beautiful location to do that. Nate, tell us just a little bit about your past. Let our listeners know where you're coming from.
Yeah, I've been working with different mission agencies over the past 23 years, and especially last 10. Have found myself in a really interesting position of being a network leader, a member of several network leadership teams. Actually, kind of most people, kind of like you, Madi. Why stop with one when you can add more, right? So at one point for a stretch of about 2 years, I was on 4 different network leadership teams. So that was kind of crazy. But generally look towards convening believers who are thinking about working collaboratively with each other. And so that's taken me to the launch lab, the Ralph Winter launch lab with Frontier Ventures, and still looking for ways to find those elegant tools to help people connect with each other in ways that currently aren't possible. So this has been really intriguing to me as I've learned more about it, and also eager to see this brought into reality.
Well, thank you. Welcome, Nate. And also look forward to your very candid and straight up answers and comments that can help our listeners understand this. Now, both of you are really special people, because when we were going through a list of everyone we know and looking at all the different podcasts and the different topics, really the BlockPlay one is the hardest to describe. It's sort of it's perhaps the most important, but the least tangible. And so you're unique because in the past, you've helped me, you've understood it, and you've helped me even put some language to it. And so I appreciate that. So I have big expectations of you today to just help me sort of add some words there to this, to really help our listeners figure out, what's unique and what this means for them on a personal level in the future. Just before we go into that, I'm going to take a few minutes because some of the people listening in today, perhaps it's the first time. And so we're talking about Assembli and BlockPlay and all of that. So what really is all of this? So I'm just going to take a couple minutes to introduce Assembli as a whole, and then go through BlockPlay very quickly, and then we can get into some interaction and some discussion about the elements that make BlockPlay unique. Assembli is not an easy thing to describe, and Madi, I know entrepreneurs should have their elevator speeches and their pitch decks with everything beautifully laid out. And you and I have worked on this in the past, trying to find language that would work with this. Still struggling with that, but I think slowly starting to come around to it. There's one-word descriptions. We could call it a metaverse, an ecosystem, a platform, or simply an app. So that's sort of what it is, but what does it actually do functionally? And that also is a big topic, but just for today, it's an app or a place that enables leaders to develop ideas, find resources, connect with helpers, build teams, and launch collaborative ventures that change the world. It brings all of the elements of any response to any need, large or small, into relationship with each other. So the key here, I think, one of the unique things about the Assembli system as a whole is that it's designed to scale both up and down. So it's designed to coalesce or bring about into alignment the resources needed to tackle the biggest challenges in the world, the things that are overwhelming to most of us. But if enough of us come together intelligently, we can actually make an impact. But it's also designed to scale down so that any young teen leader anywhere in the world can pull together a project that changes their neighborhood or helps a family down the street. And those little efforts in all of the neighborhoods of the world tied together, in a sense, become the fabric of how we as a global Christian community actually have an impact in the world. And we don't do it just programmatically or, professionally. We do it as real people who love our neighbors, right? And so that's really a bit of a functional description of Assembli. It's going to take 16 episodes to get through all of this and to actually start to pull it all together. Now, as I was thinking through this, to really sort of round out our understanding of Assembli, we have to go beyond just the sort of what is it and then what does it do, but we have to get a little bit to an emotional level, an emotional and a missional, like as Christian people of faith, what does it actually mean for us in this day and age? So I would say it's a wake-up call. Regardless of where it goes in the future, what it looks like, or how successful the actual app is, I believe it's a wake-up call, even a revolution in how we engage. And I just wanted to throw out 3 reasons for that, 3 reasons why I believe that's true. The first is that the times we live in right now are so different than the times when the structures and approaches that we are still using today were designed. So we're using structures and approaches that were designed in a different age in history. And they no longer actually are able to reflect or address the needs of today. So we need to catch up. We need something not just improving the old systems. We need something radically transformative, I believe. So Assembli embodies that. It's this call to action, to think boldly, and to act in a new radical way. The second point is this: the way we are, the way we live, the way we are as a people of faith in engaging with our world, I believe is a far cry from the way that Jesus called us to live, to act, and to love each other. I believe it's really we're a long ways from that. And improving incrementally the things that we do is not going to do a whole lot. Now, I'm not belittling. I know I'll get called out for maybe being negative, but I mean it in the best sense that we need to call ourselves and our churches and our people to a much closer obedience to the walk that Jesus called us to walk. And to do that, we need new ways of thinking about that. I really believe we're in a time that's really quite exciting because we're close enough. There's enough trouble with what we're doing now that people, I think, are starting to be willing to think of new ways. And so we have this window of opportunity now. The third and last thing I'll say is this: simply because we can. Because we can. Why do I say that? We shouldn't go out there and just do things because we can. Okay, that's not exactly what I'm saying, but listen to me. There's a quote I love from a book called Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. It's really a question she asks. She says, what is impossible to do that, if it were possible, would change everything? When you stop and think about that, you should realize that there's things that we used to think that were impossible, but now are possible. We have the tools, the opportunities, the technology, the people to do far, far more than we're doing. But we're not doing it. So that gap between what we can do and what we are doing is huge. It's absolutely huge. So I think that's another reason why we see Assembli as this call to rethink. Okay. So before we move into a description of BlockPlay, I think adding to this point of where we are at this time in history, there's a quote I want to read out of an excellent book that I've used often called Transforming Leadership by Leighton Ford. And in this book, he quotes Stephen Neal and says this: Jesus reverenced the past, yet at the same time, wrote Neal, he had an uncompromising maintenance of his right to his own vision of reality and his right to criticize the existing order in the light of that vision. Okay? It's his vision that matters. And if Jesus had a vision for how we should live as people of the way, people of faith in today's world, then we need to pay attention to that. And he goes on further and says, what all this adds up to is the probability that even the most courteous radical will get crucified. When the system is all important in church or state, it is likely that the man who criticizes any part of it will be branded heretic or traitor. And yet perhaps the most important people in history are the courteous rebels. They are the mature and creative people. So I guess we sort of consider ourselves a little bit of a rebel, and we're really working hard to stay courteous. But we think that any time that we're calling for change of this magnitude, there's going to be some feedback, some kickback on it. And that's okay, as long as we in our hearts are staying truly humble and looking for how God is leading us through this and joining us together with many other people around the world that are seeing a need for change as well. That's really the passion and the heart behind Assembli. And there's no point talking about BlockPlay and the engine and all of that stuff if we don't understand that context. Okay. Feel free to jump in if you want to and disagree with me. You're very welcome to do that. Let's just move on to a discussion of what the elements of BlockPlay are. Like, what actually is it? And I want you to just stop me and ask me to clarify any element that might be a little bit that I'm running over that our listeners would want you to ask me to clarify. All right.
I might just jump in and just to comment on what you just said. We in this innovation world that I'm jumping into right now, after having been part of just a sending agency, mission sending agency, I've kind of felt over the years that as you're trying to start new things, as you're trying to introduce new things into an environment, it really behaves a lot like an actual living organism, like our human bodies, right? If you bring in some kind of new idea, some kind of foreign object, what happens? The antibodies take over and they start to attack it, right? And that happens within an organization as well, or within a network. If you've got new things that you're trying to introduce, the instant response is to is that the rest of the organism is going to attack it and try to kill it because it doesn't belong. And so in order to kind of make these things viable, there has to be some kind of a protective cocoon that it's able to be built in. And so I think that actually really describes pretty well what you're trying to do with Assembli. This is a space that's protected that will allow for these kinds of interactions to happen without being attacked.
That's really helpful. Madi, in your work with startups, you must come across resistance. I mean, it is a startup, right? It's a new thing entering sort of a new space or maybe somebody's old space. What have you found in those situations? What works or helps?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Some of it's generational as well. Coming into organizations, I'm normally always working with people who are significantly older than myself, and people just don't like change. Change is difficult and challenging and scary, and it takes work and it takes confidence in yourself to know that as change is coming, you're not going to become irrelevant unless you don't change. And so a lot of, specifically in the marketing space, the marketing and analytics company that I'm working with, both of those companies, we face a significant challenge by more experienced marketers who don't like the transparency that the analytics bring, because it brings accountability into something that previously there was a lot of cloud around. And so when something is, when there's a lack of transparency in a process, you can honestly get away with maybe not doing as much, or people not knowing when things aren't working well. So on the analytics side, when we come in and we really start to bring data into the operations and people can see, oh, here's how this marketing campaign is actually performing, and it's really not doing well, or it's doing really well, it becomes a threat to people who have maybe attached themselves to the fact that that campaign was their idea. And so I definitely agree that anytime you're coming in with disruption, something that brings transparency and visibility and just something new, you're going to have resistance.
Yeah, and I don't think the resistance is bad. It's part of challenging us and helping us refine our ideas and learn how to communicate them better, and sometimes correct our course a bit or a lot. And so we welcome that to some degree, but we also need to know that we know that we've heard a voice calling us in this direction to get us through the tough times. Well, thank you, guys. That's really helpful. Let's just dive into what BlockPlay is. I'll try to give just a very brief overview of it so that we can get back to the interaction that we want to see here. So when we were thinking through Assembli, we had to come up with an engine, what I call an engine. So if Assembli is the car with all its controls and comforts for the driver and the passenger, BlockPlay is really the engine. It's that source of power that makes everything move. And so that's what we're focusing on today. Most people, when they look at a car, I mean, except for a few guys who lift the hood and they want to know everything underneath the hood, most people are looking at the looks and the comfort, right? And I get that. That's the same way with Assembli. But we do need to look at the engine as well. So that's what we're doing today. We needed something that would be flexible. Not just a little bit flexible, but flexible to the max. It could be adapted and put together on the fly by anyone to fit any size of challenge or problem. We needed something that was sizable so it could scale up and scale down. And we needed something that was participative. What I mean by that is it's something that enables all people, all stakeholders to participate more or less at an equal level, so that it's not just for the CEOs or the bigger name people or the educated people, but it's for all people who have a vision to change their world. And so this enables that the engine had to be able to drive that. And so we came up with BlockPlay. It's based around a concept that 15 blocks, 15 components, we call it BlockPlay, but you could call them components. I think, Nate, you had some other words for this a few days ago. You can bring that into the discussion as well. These pieces that represent real world elements that any of us wanting to do any kind of project will need to somehow engage with. So these 15 represent real world things. There's 5 in each of 3 categories. The first one is 5 types of structure blocks. So these structure blocks are groups. Groups are small elements, small gatherings of people, whether they're teams or prayer cells or families and so forth. That would be one type of block. The second is e-learning blocks, such as courses and programs. The third is projects. Projects are very focused, specific outcome initiatives that a leader designs and brings all the other elements around. Organizations, you all understand, we live in these every day. We will be able to accommodate both brick and mortar organizations represented on the system, as well as virtual organizations that can be started up by anyone very quickly. The last structure type is networks. Networks is one word very inadequately representing the whole spectrum of collaboration, from wide open chaotic movements all the way to tight, very limited partnerships between 3 or 4 partners. So those 5 structure blocks are meant to represent any kind of structure that anyone, from the teen down the street to the CEO of a big global campaign, needs to sort of to wrap around their vision and to create structure for it. The second group of blocks are what we call resources, because a leader starting a block to represent an idea invariably comes to the question of resources. Who do I bring around me? What kind of money, what kind of material, et cetera, do I need? And so any solution like BlockPlay needs to include that. So we've included 5 kinds of resource blocks. Skills is probably the most common that people think about. What can I do with my carpentry skills or my accounting or my editing skills and so forth? And where does that fit in? The second is knowledge. Knowledge is about what people know. So in the Assembli system, it's not about connecting questions with data. It's connecting questions that leaders or anyone else in the system may have with who knows the answer. So it's creating relationships in the process of answering a question and providing knowledge. The third is relationships itself. It's who you know. This is something that we all need from time to time. We need to know somebody somewhere who can help us out or can guide us through a process, or can help a refugee that is having a hard time in a city where we don't know anybody else. Like, who can come alongside that mom and help her? So being able to identify relationships as a block on the system could be very powerful. The fourth is money. Can't get around that one. It's got to be in there. We don't need to talk about that anymore. And then there's materials and logistics. Materials and logistics is interesting because it's 2 very different things, but they're related. It's what is the stuff that is out there, in the sense, the excess capacity in terms of materials in the world, and then how do we move it around to using excess logistics so that we can get it to where it needs to be. And that one block by itself can sort of morph or explode into its own sort of component app of the entire system, so that it can tie into even the recycling for movement in the world and so forth, the different some of the green stuff that's going on. And the last layer of blocks is the media blocks, because we feel that a leader with an idea, gathering resources and creating change in the world, at some point needs to be able to tell the story, to celebrate it, and to inspire others also to get involved. So we've created 5 blocks that relate to story. So these include content, your basic files and media and audio files and so on, channels that organize those into themes. So each of these being a different block. So for example, someone could say, I don't like creating content, but I do want to organize content. So they start a channel block, and it becomes a way of serving the broader world by organizing content into channels. Collections is similar, but is more static. It's like bibliographies and libraries of more curated material that can be used and attached to some of the other blocks, such as courses. Then we have champions, a block that enables a person who sees themselves essentially as an influencer to be able to have space in the system to bring attention to causes that they care about, but do that through other people and other people's blocks. And then media networks being the last one, where that's sort of this bigger scope way of organizing all the other media blocks into some kind of a, whether it's media movements or companies like, a CNN or a Fox News that actually aggregates material and provides it in a certain way. So that's 15 blocks. And we are willing to start any number of blocks that represent something that is not yet represented by those 15 blocks. But we really believe that 99% of the needs out there and the realities out there can be represented by those or a subtype of one of those. Now, just one other thing before we move on, I open it up for some discussion. The key to BlockPlay, and the key that I think that I'd like our discussion, the direction I'd like our discussion to go in is how these blocks interact. I get challenged all the time when people look at this saying, Mark, you need to start small. And Madi, we've had this chat too, right? It's like, which are the most important blocks to start with? Because this is so big, you can't do it all at once. And I struggle with that, and I still do, because the magic of BlockPlay is how they all fit together. Any one of these by themselves is interesting, but it's not like super powerful, right? It's an individual thing. And that's the problem I think we have in the world, and a lot of solutions that good people are trying to come up with, is that they focus on these individual things, but the solution lies in coming to that critical mass, that coalescing of enough of the elements so that you actually get a functioning breakthrough, right? You look at your, NASA building ships that go to the moon and to Mars, and how the entire thing can fall apart, or a launch can be delayed because some tiny little component broke down or didn't function properly. In some ways, I think that's what we're dealing with, is we have all the pieces available, but we don't have a way to put it together. And that might take a lot of experimenting. And I realize that maybe this is many years still in the works, but that's okay as long as we're working on it. So the reality of how these blocks work together is where the magic is. A couple of rules here about that. One is that every other block, with very few exceptions, every block can connect to any other block. So the kid down the street trying to take care of grandmothers, their block that represents that effort as a project perhaps, or even just as a group with a little team of friends, can connect to somebody in an entirely different country doing a similar thing, and they can start creating a little network. Or it can connect with people who provide resources that more professionally help us understand how to take care of grandmothers. So every block can fit with every other block, multiple times over, reused and repurposed, and brought together in many different combinations. I used to use the word infinite, but the mathematicians in our groups said, no, can't do that. Maybe exponential might be allowed, but not infinite. You can't do this with infinite combinations. So, but exponentially reconfigurable is something that is I think at the center of BlockPlay. All right. That gives you a bit of an idea, and we've talked about this in the past, but I invite your interaction a bit on just unpacking a bit what this really means. I have a few sort of leading questions here that maybe you can jump in on. The first I want to raise is the idea of what this means for leaders. Okay, a value we have is that leadership becomes distributed. It becomes decentralized. And the kinds of top-down structures we have today tend to focus leadership in a few places. And those leaders become gatekeepers, and those leaders tend to become eventually, especially with technology today, sort of winner-take-all kind of leaders, and they can connect to the resources and suck those up. And a lot of the people doing the best work with the best ideas are forgotten. And so we see BlockPlay as a way to empower people with tools that traditionally are found only in the largest organizations, yet can come down into the hands of local people. Have you found this in your experience where there tends to be this sort of gatekeeper phenomenon, and it tends to sort of wrap up resources in one direction?
Yeah, I have been in situations where I'm trying to lead a networking team at a conference or something like that, where I've got 20, 30 leaders of different organizations in a room, and we're trying to figure out how we can collaborate, what we can do together, what are the needs that the leaders have in the room. And time again, I get, hey, we need to come up with some kind of resource tool that gives us availability of what everybody is doing. And so we can all kind of compare notes, and people go into those meetings. Unfortunately, I would like them to go into those meetings with ideas of how we can work together. But most leaders, I think, go into those meetings thinking, hey, I'm here to find out what the other people are doing so I can compete better or something like that. But what they invariably come up with as their big request of the network is to create an online database. And I frequently have learned to respond to that by saying, no, that's not actually what you want. I know it's what you're asking for, but it's not actually what you want. Because you think about, if I go online and we're going to spend all this huge amount of time collecting all these things and curating all these resources, and we'll put them out there. It'll have to be behind a firewall with a password because people have security concerns. Mm-hmm. It's going to be this, I don't know, just hard to keep refreshed and active and living. And so it's just, I know as people have created these things, they don't get used. So I resist this. I say, no, you don't actually want that. What we really want is a relational database. You don't go when you have a question, you don't go to some online thing where you need to remember your password so you can maybe find it because you put in the right search parameters. No, what do? You go to the person that you know might have the answer, or who might be closer to finding out the answer. Who do I need to know? And so we don't ever use those things because what we really actually want is a relational database. And I think that's what you're getting towards here, is the living nature of all of these resources that you're going to have out there are connected to real people who you can talk to about them, and they can refer you to other people, and it just starts to create the actual usefulness that they're looking for.
Very helpful. Madi, in your work with startups, I think there's been stories, over especially, with modern technology, maybe the last 20, 30 years, with the network effect and so on, where you have, some huge success story and you think they're invincible. And then they have all the money in the world as far as the rest of us are concerned. And then all of a sudden a startup comes along and just sort of, how did they, bootstrapping it with hardly any resources, start to become a threat to the others? And I sort of love that. We all love the underdog that sort of starts to take over, but then that startup also can become, the big bad boy in the block too, perhaps. What enables that to happen?
In my opinion, there's a couple of things. So I've worked both in startup environments and very corporate environments. Mm-hmm. And the difference between a corporate environment that is very professional, very process driven, is that you have a level of consistency and potentially even excellence that comes at a cost. And the cost is lack of agility. And so the difference between a corporation and a startup, in my opinion, is that one is a speedboat and one is a barge. And it takes months to years to turn a barge when there's a new opportunity or something that is disruptive in the market, where they are having to come together in multiple leadership groups. Because I think I used to have this idea that corporations, and maybe this is true to some extent, but everybody had their fighting corners, and it was our team versus your team, and it was very almost pride driven in terms of winning the battles, which created a very political environment for some corporations. But honestly, after being heavily embedded in a larger corporation, what I saw was that the tiniest decision impacted so many people that it was very important that all of the leaders of all of the teams be in alignment around a decision. And Mark, if you want to talk about something challenging, it is getting alignment around numerous very smart people who have very different motives and objectives on their plate. And so the diversity of talent and the need for some more hierarchical decision making, and honestly, the number of problems that have to get discussed by multiple people create this environment that it's just very hard to make a change and make a transition and go in another direction. Versus in a startup environment, this is normally a group of people who see a very distinct issue, who come around with a solution for the issue, and they are constantly iterating. If they try something 3 or 4 times and they get customer feedback that, hey, that solution isn't great, they can instantly make the decision to change that in their product, update it, and can keep moving forward until, again, I think that all organizations, unless you adopt both a growth mindset, a change and innovation mentality, as well as have an infrastructure set up to actually implement those changes and ideas that come throughout the organization, will probably also end up in a larger, more stable environment. And that's not always a bad thing. But to your point earlier, it does create, if I were to apply this to what I see, at least in mission work, it creates there's a need, an immediate need right now. And that need needs to be solved today. It doesn't need to be solved 3 years from now when 6 leaders of 5 major organizations can all agree on the way that they're going to solve something and then have all this time to actually execute it. So the decentralization of not just leadership, but of decision making and empowering people to see a need, know that they have a solution for it, and solve the problem is so powerful. And I think that's really at the heart of what you said about a core value of what Assembli is trying to do. I'll talk for one more second. I just want to go back to something you said about the core value of basically decentralizing leadership in the missions environment. I think about, as you talk about or think about decentralizing leadership, what does that mean? What is that going to require? And I think about, what is it that leaders have that others don't? And I think that it's a combination of a couple of things. The first is the ability to see a problem and cast a vision for how they're going to solve that problem. And casting a vision, Mark, as you're learning, is really hard. I think you've got a fantastic vision for Assembli and what you're building. I think it's a game changer in the world of missions and in life. For the technology, but I've watched you and we've worked together as you really struggle to come up and clarify that vision and communicate that vision. I think that once you've cast a strong vision, there's that next step of being able to actually build a strategy around your vision, right? So say, this is what we want to do. Here's our game plan for the vision. And then being able to centralize resources and people around that strategy that say, okay, I've cast my vision. It's clear. I've come up with a strategy for how we're going to start tackling the execution of the vision. Now I've got all these people bought into the vision. They're centralized around the idea. And now it's the hard part. We actually have to execute. And the execution of a vision is where things start to fall apart when you don't have a lot of grit, a lot of time, a lot of resources. It can be very challenging to keep the group in alignment and moving in the same direction. So I think that a lot of times what I've seen in the missions world or in the church world in general, whatever you want to call it, in the Christian community, is you have people who have good ideas, but that idea is not going to hold up through the traditional routes of basically buying influence of the people around you, selling the idea, clarifying the vision, putting out a strategy, and then ultimately executing it. And so it ends up getting stuck in what is a really good idea, but can't actually ever get anywhere because that person's not necessarily skilled in what would be a quote unquote traditional leadership skill set. So it's just interesting to think about both how does Assembli provide the channel for bringing skills of leadership to, day-to-day people who are passionate about a problem but don't have the resources to solve it.
Sorry, I was going to say, it seems like you need to have Assembli available in order to build Assembli in some ways, right? That would be really super helpful. I really like what you're saying, Madi, about how leadership works. I think it's in terms of the network leadership that I worked with as well. It's really interesting because a network works kind of like a startup. It's got a lot more freedom to do things, and they can be a little bit more nimble. But what I found is that when people form network leadership teams, the people that are doing it are usually leaders in organizations, and that's what their context is. That's what their paradigm is organizational leadership. And so there isn't any kind of guidebook on how to start an effective leadership team for a network. And so they wind up patterning it after organizational leadership programs, right? And so what happens is they quickly become institutionalized and become the barge because they haven't stuck to more networking strategies along the way. So that's another struggle that we come up with that I think Assembli combats.
Yeah, many. Go ahead, Madi.
No, you go ahead.
No, just so many thoughts, flooding through my mind as you're talking. Don't forget the thought you have right now too. But I'll be the first to admit that when it comes to the execution, I struggle. And I've seen so many other people like me in the same shoes. So in many ways, this is personal to me because I want to help those people. And I've seen them all over the world be able to successfully get past or deal with that. And at the end of the day, it's not going to be about them becoming better at executing. Maybe it is for some people, but it's about teamwork. It's about finding the people that come alongside and help out. The other thought, as you're talking, that the whole speedboat and barge metaphor there is fascinating, and I feel like Assembli has to do both in a sense. It has to create that space for the speedboats to move around and quickly address things, and yet somehow come together. And when they come together, they might become barges, but they're still speedboats. So there isn't a word picture that maybe fits all of this, right? We're sort of creating hybrids of these word pictures, but we need those speedboats, and we need the barges that sort of provide some stability and do some of that long-term heavy hauling. I think in 20, 30 years ago, we started to see a bit of a trend where, churches were becoming their own mission agency in a sense, and they were doing something over there, another church over there. And everybody sort of got their own ideas and just ran off and did it, right? And there was a backlash to that too, because it's just chaos. There's no coordination. There's no alignment of efforts, and there's people doing things they have no idea what they're doing, And it was good in a sense, but it also created a lot of problems. So what we're trying to do here is say, how can we bless and empower those people, but help them to do it intelligently and weave things together so that there's not only parallel partnering, but there's I don't know what the exact word might be, but longitudinal, or sort of like the relay race, passing on the torch, that kind of partnering to others. So it's a crazy new world where I think with the technology we have, we actually can now do both. Madi, what were you going to share?
No, that actually led into what I was thinking even better. The thought that comes to my mind when we talk about kind of the decentralization of leadership using Assembli. The problem that I've seen happen specifically in churches, but in organizations, both professional and missional, not for profit, is that what happens is that you have a group of people who are all passionate about solving the problem, whatever that defined problem is. Let's call it hunger, okay? Hunger in a specific area. But the issue is generally that we're people and we all have our own ideas and we all have our own thoughts. And there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to solve a systemic issue. And so I think, again, if executed properly through Assembli, one of the beauties of it is that, to your point, Mark, is that it has the framework to create the barge, meaning here's the problem that we're going to attack. We're going to attack hunger. And if you think about complex issues that are continuing to persist in our world today, it's because they're multifaceted issues. They're complex. And we only have so much time and so many resources available as a single person that maybe I can only tackle one part of the problem, but I'm dedicated to solving one part of that problem. I'm not ever going to solve the whole problem myself. And my way of solving the problem may look different than your way of solving the problem. If we talk about hunger, my way may be that every Saturday night I invite, a family over to my house. Our doors are open and I'm contributing in that way. And Nate may go start up a soup kitchen down the road. And Mark, you may start a community of people who are going to bring together a meal every single day so that there's a spot in town where people can come and have food, right? And somebody else may start up a school teaching skills so that people can get a job and potentially make additional funds to feed their families and contribute back into the network, right? So we're all solving the problem of hunger. We're doing it in our own ways based on our own skill set and our own vision. And so instead of me and you and Nate all having these almost competing for resources mentality to solve our own problems, we can all come behind what would be that bigger vision of we're all passionate to solve hunger. Here's all the ways that we are each going to contribute to the problem, which means that I can act like a speedboat, you can act like a speedboat, and Nate can be a speedboat, but we're all on the barge of solving the hunger problem. And it becomes a much more decentralized, in your term, way to solve something that is unsolvable for any one of us.
That's a great picture because in a sense, the big problem might need people starting every one of the 15 blocks, 1,000 times over. And the solution is all 1,000 of those, hundreds of people doing it, but all coming together, which leads us to that issue that I think we touched another conversation we had on the ability to sort of the metrics and the evaluation. Are we able to have the tools to actually define the problem in its deepest level, in its systemic level, and all the different pieces, and then allow people to participate in these other little ways, but it adds up to the whole. I think that's what you're saying. And then to be able to measure it, right? Because if you're only measuring your part, you might be successful in your piece, but you have no idea if you're having any kind of sustainable impact in the bigger picture. So the framework of Assembli and the block system allows all of the different measurements to come together into sort of this mosaic or fabric of what is happening. Nate, I can see you have something to share.
Well, I kind of resist metrics, to be honest with you. I see all of the great innovation that's happening, all the great ways that we're taking the discoveries that the business world is making, design thinking, and putting together canvases to help us plan our projects and different things like this. And there's some really great tools that they bring. And what I'm surprised by in the ministry world is that we just adopt those and we keep all the same language. We use the word customer when customer doesn't fit, but we keep all those same things. We don't adapt them at all to how we think in ministry that's different than business. So we don't oftentimes we take this hardcore interest in metrics and being able to prove things, and we kind of discard the work of the Holy Spirit. We kind of discount things that are intangible that the Holy Spirit is connected to when we get hyper focused on metrics. Now, metrics are really cool. I think that's a really I love that metrics are built into Assembli. But to be honest, I'm much more interested in how to use those tools with I like the term cultivating serendipity. And creating serendipity is usually thought of as things that happen by accident, like a happy discovery that you weren't expecting. But you can also kind of prepare. You can leverage opportunities for serendipity to happen, and that's what I think is that the super combination between the availability of metrics, but what Assembli does is supercharge the ability to cultivate that serendipity to bring those by accident, just increase the odds that we're going to have good connections to be able to apply those metrics as well.
And that may be what it's almost hard to describe. It may be what we're trying to get at when we have those 5 media blocks. They sound sort of static, but what there really are is story. It's telling the story, or telling many stories of these serendipitous, moments that come together, and I'm just looking in amazement and saying, yeah, God is doing something here. Wow, how did that happen? Wow. Let's just go on to maybe another sort of just a little bit different direction here, or focus. We've been talking about leaders, and that got us into some really good chat. And thoughts on this. I'd like to focus a little bit on the resources. And I know we've touched on this already, but the whole area of supply chain, and I've made this statement of conviction that we have no lack of resources. And I believe that. I don't have the metrics to necessarily prove that. But I believe that the church is rich in every part of the world in every way. I've lived in Africa, I've lived in Latin America and Europe and North America, and I've seen it from many different angles. But I've called it a supply chain problem in the past. We don't have systems to get it around, to get the resources and around. And I don't just mean money, but all types of resources, including knowledge and skills and so on. How do you see the BlockPlay sort of assist in that in a way that doesn't just create another heavy system on top of what we have, but somehow unleashes what we already have?
So, Mark, some of my professional background has been very focused in project management. So when I think about, honestly, the resource blocks are definitely my favorite and the easiest for me to grasp. They make a lot of sense. I see a need in the world. I'm going to go and start a project. And relating back to what we were saying earlier around leaders, this project is going to be an element of basically my way to communicate to the community. This is my vision for how I'm going to solve this problem. And, I'd love to see where the project block specifically has gotten to today. But in the past, I know we've talked about having an easy way to define a problem and put, steps into how basically create the strategy for solving the problem, and just helping individuals who may not be project managers by nature add language and clarity to what they're trying to accomplish. And so the project block to me is really powerful. It's kind of that starting point, at least in my mind, because of my background, of, if I'm going to accomplish something, I'm going to go out and I'm going to create a vision with this project block. And then all of the other resource blocks, to me, the way that I would leverage the tool is these are going to be all the things that I need to accomplish the project. So I'm just looking back at my notes to get all the specific resources, but go back to our example for hunger. My vision for solving hunger is going to be, we're going to start a soup kitchen in this community, right? This local community. So I can very well articulate, here's my problem. We're going to have, we need a building somewhere that we can meet. We need people who are capable of cooking good food, because I'm not a chef. I can't cook anything very well, right? We need some people who can communicate to the community that this is what we're doing. Maybe we need some funding. So we're going to create a group where we need those relationships to meet people who are maybe in the local government or in the local churches. And so I would approach the project by using all of the other resource blocks to support the effort of my project. So the resource blocks are my favorite. Of all the complexity of the whole platform, the resources to me are very simple. We have a problem. This is what we need to solve it. And it gives me a way to connect and track everything that's going on around my project very quickly and easily within the module itself. So I'm a big fan of these blocks.
We often tend to connect leadership with the structure blocks, right? There's a leader and they start to create a structure and so on. But I think what Assembli does is it enables leaders who are resource people to also define their resource in terms of a vision, saying, I have a vision for this. I'm probably not going to call everyone to action for it, but I want to define the vision and say that these resources are available, that my vision for my resources is this. And then the system starts to serendipitously put together the connections that are needed to bring it to life.
Yeah, there's so many people out there that have funding resources that are, well, in the missions world, the needs are great. There's a lot of underfunded workers in the world, a lot of people looking for resources. It used to be that we would go to our local church or we'd go to different churches. We'd have an opportunity to talk about our project or what we were doing, and individuals and churches would support us. And those days, frankly, people may not know this, but those days have really disappeared since COVID. And even before COVID, people aren't invited to speak at churches anymore. Mm-hmm. And so there is it's very difficult to find individuals to set up meetings with. So what happens oftentimes is people are converting their personal support requests into project requests from foundations or different groups like this, and they're building their personal support into the project. And so there's that's a whole different way of approaching this. You have to build a case for yourself in a different way. It's more based on productivity and the metrics we were talking about, and it discounts the intangibles of your ministry. And it's just a really a completely different way of doing things. And what I've heard is that the people who are running those foundations have a lot more competition in the people that they're looking to support as well, and they have to use those metrics to try to figure out who's going to be more of a return on investment for the kingdom. And so then you get the problem of the people who are very eloquent speakers getting funded, and the people who maybe are really good at ministry, but they can't express their ministry as well to a funder. They don't get supported. So these are complex problems that are happening within the missions funding world. And I think that having this ability for funders to, I've even actually heard that there was a guy who has been requesting funds from major foundations. One of his contacts from the foundation confessed to him that he thought we have actually been training you guys to lie to us. We've been training you to exaggerate because things are so competitive out here. So it's just really, it's a problem. So having this ability for there to be a lot more visibility, the ability to provide visibility on what your needs are, and to have those foundations not have to try to figure out how to find them, but they're available, and you can kind of look at each other in new ways, I think is going to make new possibilities happen. I've even heard from foundation leaders that they have a hard time finding ministries that they want to support or they can support. So part of it is visibility.
Yeah, and Mark, adding to what Nate's saying, I think one of the real values to Assembli, from my perspective, is this is new language, but it's almost searcher intent. So just speaking personally for myself, I think at a certain point, and Nate, you made a really good point earlier about ministries having to adopt the business mentality and kind of what's worked. And honestly, not to be rude, but it's because those are the people that are making the money in the world. Ministries don't make money, they give money, they support. Businesses make money, they fund the support. And so I think that this drive, I don't think it's interesting to hear you talk about it on the flip side, because I think it's opened my eyes to, oh, okay, this is a different way of thinking through ministry and impact and what the dollars are going toward. But we're very much trained in our professional environment to look for the opportunity that is going to make the most impact 100% of the time. Yep. Because all of us, you, me, Mark, everybody, we have one life. We have so many resources. We only have so much time. And I think we all have a desire to take what we have and make the most out of it. So why, as you know, let's say that somebody came to me and wanted me to manage a project for them. Why, if I could manage this project and it could impact 5 people, would I instead, do that instead of taking my project management time and impact 1,000 people? The answer is I'm not going to. And so I think ministry has become this place where we as individual givers, all of us, all humans who have a desire to give and help needs, are constantly looking for a way to resource ourselves, most effectively and efficiently, which is again where the power of Assembli is to me. Because now, if Nate, if you're, wherever you're located in the world, I didn't ask you earlier, but if you're where you're at and you have a tiny group of community, let's say 50 or 100 people that you're working with in your network, but your network is attached now to this broader idea and this broader plan of what is it exactly that you're working on and how is that going to impact the whole, I can now attach your tactic and your strategy to this overall goal. And now it becomes a matter of me looking at, okay, I care about this goal. Here's 30 different, people who are doing something for the goal. Now it's about who am I in most alignment with in terms of, do I see that strategy working? Do I see this strategy working? Would I rather put resources here or there? But I can see all within kind of this framework of they're all working toward this goal. Now, who's most aligned with me? Because I can guarantee that I'm going to be more aligned with somebody that's totally different than who Mark might be aligned with. And that's okay, because we're all working to find these organizations that we believe in their strategy, because we all have different preferences and motives and thought processes. And we really all want to find the way to best resource ourselves. So I think that that's really a power that Assembli brings, is just that searcher intent of, I want this goal and I see these strategies and I'd like to partner myself with this specific group because they're in most alignment with how I would attack the problem myself.
Well said. It's interesting because it's about the outcome, but it's also personal, right? it's connecting these two. I want to make a difference in the world, but I also care about things that I care about, and I want to work with people that I like and support people I like. And so this framework sort of enables you to do that fairly efficiently. Another thing I haven't mentioned, and there's thousands of little features that we're not mentioning here, obviously, but is when blocks attach to each other. I mean, behind the block is a real person, the person who started the block, right? And there'll be an invitation from one block to another, and that opens up basically a conversation. And the person, you can carry on a conversation for minutes or days or years for that matter, until finally the other person says decline or accept, right? So it's a bit like dating, I guess, but you're considering this relationship, and you're getting to know that person, and all of those many different relationships in different directions are managed by the platform, and you can keep track of them. And not lose that inside some WhatsApp group that's 3 years old or something. Yeah. So, Nate, any closing thoughts on that topic?
Well, just what you were saying, I think it's as you were describing at the beginning of our time, how BlockPlay works, and I've always visualized how to describe this to other people. I always think of it as my first experience with Microsoft Access, and understanding that, I see what they're actually doing is they're creating several Excel sheets, and then they're connecting those Excel sheets through common fields that are in both of the Excel sheets. And now you can access all kinds of different things in different directions that are based off of these. It's also similar to like a pivot table, where you've got all kinds of different sources of data, and then they're interacting with each other and flying around. So that I think, when I think of what is Assembli, how will it work? It's like taking all of the apps that you use, like Slack for this, and Virtuous for this, or all the different tools that you use, and connecting them through common fields and making them all interactive. And it just blows my mind that why, my big question has always been, why hasn't anybody done this before? Because it's, you see people combining 2 or 3 different real life block functions together. Like Slack, as an example, could be, you're connecting people to each other, but you're also giving them an ability to look at resources. And they can have meetings. So that's 2 or 3 of those things, but you're talking about adding all 15, and part of me goes, wow, that's genius. And we need that. I needed that for a network leader who's trying to overcome the challenges of all of the operations that happen in a network. I needed that way before yesterday, right? So I'm not as patient as you are to say, hey, this might take years. I don't want it to take years.
Me neither.
But yeah, anyway, maybe that's helpful just in terms of picturing how this all works and what how it's going to fit together logistically.
Exactly. It's I don't think any of us have come to understand the possible applications and potential here. We're trying to sort of skirt around it here, but I think trying to understand why we need to do it, or somebody needs to do it without compromise. Do at least this, and hopefully a lot better than we've imagined, because the potential is there, the technology is there, and there's smart enough people to help this happen. Maybe we can close in the next few minutes with just one more sort of topic to explore a little bit, and that's in the area of collaboration. All of this is collaborative. I mean, it's designed with that whole spirit of collaboration and helping each other and working together. But there is the specifics of how we collaborate in I guess, or create entities of collaboration. An issue I've noticed, I was involved in partnering training many years ago, and the wording that was used was building partnerships, the creating partnerships, or a partnership. And my observation of that was that it took a lot of work to create a partnership that often didn't do a whole lot. Some of them were really good, but many of them just were not worth the effort. So eventually the partners would walk away and say, let's just do this because it's easier to do it ourselves. And I understand the motive for that. And yet, many of the biggest problems in the world or the problems in our neighborhood can't be solved without working together. So how do we work that out? So Assembli is designed to help create a space where we sort of streamline that process without compromising. Building trust and relationships is essential to partnering. We still need to do that. But we don't need to create new partnerships every time we want to reconfigure our relationships around a new task, right? So some things we can keep going the same while we tweak a few other things or change the direction or repurpose the relationships. So this whole thing between partnering and partnerships, I think, is important to me, and we've tried to reflect it in Assembli. We want to create a process of partnering, not a place where we simply aim at partnership. Some may happen, that's fine. But how do we partner on a global scale? Does that make sense, Nate? You have a lot of history in this and personal interest in it.
Yeah, the network leadership teams that I've experienced working on, it's, how networks form is that people have a common goal. They maybe meet at a conference or they somehow connect with each other and they say, hey, we need to work together on this. Let's get our organizations, because we have this common goal, let's work together. And they form a team, and what they have in mind is the projects they want to do. But on the network leadership team, part of the purpose of that particular group is to convene the network and to do all the operational things that are needed. And most of them don't want to do that. They're not even equipped to do that because they came together because they had these projects that they wanted to work on. So they're individually helping to build the projects, but then they run into the problem of having to do all the operations as well. How are we going to put together an event to gather all of us when none of us is an event organizer? And we don't have money because we're a network to hire one. So now we're trying to do this double duty. Well, if we're all now working on creating our event, then we will not be doing the projects that we wanted to actually do together. Right? So we'll just be derailing ourselves. Now, one way to do that is to create, as you're creating a network leadership team, you think about that and you build a whole second hemisphere of that group. Like if you're thinking of it like a brain, and you've got that whole second hemisphere, that's the operations team to serve you. But most people, operations gifted people aren't hanging on trees ready to be picked everywhere you go. So that's difficult to find those people. But I think this creates the functionality of an operations team, because you can call on volunteers, you can find the resources out there. You're creating the online functionality of all the things that you'd want to do, like curation of what you've been doing. It becomes easier because you create resources, curation resources that can be shown to other people. And so there's just so many opportunities for the existing network leadership teams out there in the world would be twice as effective, at least, if they had this available to them, because they would be able to focus on the projects that they were trying to work on.
So, Mark, if I can add here, if I think about traditionally, and I'd love to hear from you guys. You've both worked in ministry far longer and been involved in lots of organizations, but from my very limited perspective and very extremely US-based perspective, especially in the culture and environment we live in today, I view and see divisiveness as the tool to gain influence and resources. this is both true for us right now in the U.S. politically, but I've seen this be the tool and the tactic used in the church, especially in the U.S. for years. And I have done some personal research on this because I was really intrigued. Growing up, I very much would try to seek out people who maybe I was most in alignment with all of their beliefs. And if I wasn't in alignment with all of their beliefs, then I couldn't support their mission or their vision because I disagreed with subpoints A, B, and C on the list. And so it's a tribe mentality, right? We as people are naturally inclined to a likeness of mind. We want to have a tribe. I can associate with these people because it makes it easy for me as a human. I know that if you're a Southern Baptist, you probably believe these 10 things are true. Or if I know that you're a Catholic, then these 10 things are true and these are your values. And it puts this label that they focus on very core issues and core beliefs that just make it very easy for me to decide, okay, I'm going to do this over this because I'm in alignment with them. What I think that needs to happen fundamentally, that I'm hoping Assembli has at least the channel to execute, is shifting us as a people from a tribe mentality to a goal mentality, shifting from like an association saying this is who I am and this is who I associate to okay, I align with these values and goals and we can all work together in this way. So kind of going from different separate circles to a Venn diagram to say, I don't agree with you in these 3 areas over here, but we're both in alignment around this is a problem and this is a goal, and I'm willing to partner with you regardless of if we agree on all these other 10 topics. We can all come around this idea because it's a core value that we all share regardless of our other 10 values. And so I think that Assembli providing that channel to, instead of saying, I'm sure we're going to end up with groups on there that are the traditional organizations. So you're going to have the Southern Baptist community and the Lutherans and the Catholics and whatever else you want to have, your traditional structures. I hope that this also provides a more organic environment for people who are like myself and don't really fit in any of the buckets. I don't associate with any single group, nor do I want to, but I still could come around the fact that there are people in this world, there are problems in this world that are causing suffering, and I am in alignment with those problems, and I'm willing to dedicate myself to that, regardless of if I agree with the traditional belief system. So taking away the ability to use divisiveness to gain influence and resources, and instead use values to assimilate, to your word, assemble the group of people to actually accomplish the problem we all care about.
I love that. There's so much more we could talk about that. So you can have a community of people who are pretty much homogeneous. They think and act alike, but that group can enjoy being what they are together, but still then collaborate almost as a unit from time to time with other groups where they have some alignment. It doesn't have to be full alignment, right? So this creates space for those serendipitous relationships to start to happen, where these two groups that would never normally meet, and so therefore no opportunity for relationships, actually cross over for a short time on a project or some common cause they're involved in. And then you start to realize they're actually not monsters after all, and they can actually like each other, right? And so that's part of the dream here, is that we start to create communities of Christians around the world starting to rub shoulders in ways that they never would have before. And it just sort of spreads, a good virus spreading. I love that. And it as you were talking, I was thinking of a piece of this collaborative space that we're trying to create is so that you can have a large network that is made up possibly of many micro networks, and those micro networks can sort of move in and out of partnerships. They can say, hey, there's that partnership. Right now they're focused on this, and I love that. So they sort of sort of wade into it, and they participate, but they're still sort of have their own identity. Not in a bad way, but they're just this group over here. And then that project is done, or the emphasis changes a bit, and they can sort of migrate and connect with that other network or so on. And so you can see these pockets of sort of wandering partnerships that can look chaotic if we didn't have the platform, but actually are good. They work, they're organic, right?
There's a element there in mission sending agencies where they're having a hard time recruiting or mobilizing people. A lot of times that comes from the newer generations being resistant to taking on long-term commitments. And I don't think that that's because that, by the way, that they're unable to, but it's more of a desire to, I think that comes from a desire to be, honor their commitments. It's the integrity issue that keeps them in that role, in that attitude, because they don't want to commit to something that they can't commit to with integrity for a long period of time. So that's a skill that or something that the mission agencies are having a hard time finding people to even fill out a long-term application because it has the word long-term in it. Mm-hmm. And so part of this is the way to solve this is to say, hey, have a different attitude about how people are joining us. Is there something that we can work on together today? Will that be meaningful for us? Will it be relevant? Let's continue to do it as long as it's relevant. And the second it stops being relevant and meaningful for us, we can stop and you're free to walk away if it's not relevant anymore. That's a scary, in terms of going overseas long-term, that's a really scary thought for the existing institutionalized mission agencies. But what you're creating enables people with even small commitment levels to participate in some way with this crowdsourcing or some ability to move the whole a little bit this direction, even if it's, for minutes. You can contribute for minutes, even if that's what your contribution level is, and it's relevant and meaningful. We have to stop saying no to those people and create spaces for them to contribute as well.
Exactly. I think another sort of element that ties in a bit with that is I think some of the challenges we face, and we put together networks to try to address some of these bigger issues, but we still fail or struggle, is because some of the components that we need to be part of the mix or part of the recipe aren't on anyone's radar. They must be out there, but we don't know who they are. They're not part of an organization. They're not registered somewhere. They're simply out there somewhere, maybe in the business community or whatever. But we don't know who they are. We don't know what their names are. We don't know how to connect with them. But what Assembli would do is bring sort of out of the woodwork, in a sense, bring those people, invite them into a community without being scary and saying you have to sign on the dotted line here to participate, but just say, hey, here's my area of interest. I'm willing to help. And then start to pull those people into the gaps that we have. And I think the keys, I really believe the keys to the breakthroughs in most of the problems we're facing, the keys exist, but we don't know where they are. And if we can create a way of starting to mobilize more of the 99% that aren't really engaged, we're going to start to see some amazing stories come out of this.
No doubt.
Well, that's a big talk. Any thoughts, any last points anyone wants to make? We'll invite both of you at some point back to some future podcast on some block that is particularly of interest to you. And we'll sort of hopefully be farther along, and we'll have other things to talk about by then, and maybe even play on our devices with some things. That's when it gets really fun. But I appreciate both of you taking a very good chunk of your time to be with us today. And we invite you to continue to participate and give feedback and comments and any thoughts that come across your mind as you're going to sleep or in the shower. Please share those with us. I just invite all of our listeners to visit us at assembli.net and sign up for the newsletter or the other options that you have there. We want to hear from you as well. And if anything in this podcast has inspired you or caused you to think of some new angle or way to explain assembly or some new application that you say, boy, these guys really have to make sure it's in there, then get in touch with us. We want to listen to every one of you. So thank you for being with us today. We're going to move into a new podcast that focuses on one block at a time. So the conversation will be a little bit more focused in the future. Thanks for being with us. Thanks, Nate and Madi. It's been really great to catch up with you guys.
It's been a privilege. Thanks for including us.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the week.